Welcome to another Forensic Happy Hour. I think, as I say every time, because the guests that we have coming on here are those people that you want to follow. The social media, make sure that you're reading all of their blogs. Today is no exception when we have Josh Lemon that's going to be on here talking about, well, I'm not going to get to what I want to talk about. I'll let him talk for a little while. But, as it always is, we make things up, and, well, I make things up. The guest typically doesn't. But we'll have, I know it's going to be a great conversation. So, without further ado, I can say Prost, cheers, but I'm going to be the one that's having the beer here. And I want to welcome Josh. Thank you very much for coming on to this. I know that as we talked about, you're in the future,
I
which
am.
you've already told me that it is a great day for everyone else tomorrow. So
Yep.
I do appreciate you coming on, especially as early as it is down in Sydney. So with always starting out the conversation, I want you to kind of lay the groundwork. Tell people, really what we like to do on the show, especially talk about with the digital forensic incident response type of stuff and gear it towards, where did you kind of get the bug? Where'd that bug kind of take you? And then, obviously what you've been doing today.
Okay. Wow. Well, winding the clock back, I think, early on, I didn't even start sort of in the digital forensics and incident response space. I originally kind of left high school and I was really good at doing sort of technical work in theatre and events. So I went and did training here in Sydney, where I am now, in theatre and events and live production. So originally, I kind of trained in that space and oh gosh, worked in that space for a good couple of years and toured around Australia and around New Zealand a little bit, and then realised that living out of a suitcase for kind of 80% of the year wasn't something I wanted to do long term, and probably wasn't healthy long term after trying to do that. So I eventually ended up with a project back in Sydney. And it was it was an extremely large event at the time. And the person kind of running it said, "Oh, you kind of know IT and computers, and you kind of know this major event space. Can you come and do this?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. Let's give it a go." And it was true. I mean, I'd always been into computers, and programming actually is kind of where I got the bug for a lot of IT space, even before I kind of left high school at the time. So I did that I worked on that, I think, for about 3 years. And then after that, I did some more work sort of in the events and IT space. And this kind of ad popped up on the internet, as it does for SANS training. I was like, "Oh, what's this? It's kind of this IT type training." And at the time, like I really had no idea what SANS was, and I was like, well, I kind of I was always interested in investigating things and understanding how things work, which I think is kind of where I started with software programming at the time. And I kind of looked at this course. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of like an incident response course or an investigation type course thing. I was like, oh, this kind of sounds interesting. And then I kind of looked at the price and I was like, whoa, I don't have a lot of cash to kind of pay for
Right,
this.
right.
And I mean, at the time, because I was working for a company where I was employed to do IT and events, they were like, well, yeah, we'll happily give you time off to go and do this, but we can't really fund you to
Yeah,
go and do
yeah.
this
Here's the time.
because,
We'll let you do
yeah,
it.
here's the time, but we don't really have a lot of money to fund you for it. I was like, all right, cool. So I kind of researched a bit more. I was like, all right, I think I'm okay to use my own cash to kind of pay for this. And I remember the first day, it was actually down in Canberra, so I had to travel 2.5 hours. I caught up with a friend in Canberra and asked if I could have a bed at their place, because I was kind of doing this all on the cheap at the time.
Right.
And I remember sitting in class the first day. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I hope this is worth it, because this is a lot of money." And I just
Right,
spent my own
right,
cash.
right.
And I think it was about day two. I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! Like, this is brilliant." And it was one of the instructors there at the time, and who I was kind of speaking to. I was like, "I didn't realize you could just have a full-time job investigating things on computers." Like, I kind of did that as part of the job I was doing already, I was like, well, I can actually, like, you guys get paid to just do this full time. I was like, that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was kind of that point, I pretty much pivoted my career a little bit. I was like, all right, if I can do this full time, I'm going to try and like go down this path and do that. And then after there, like that's kind of where I formally pivoted over into IT security and digital forensics. And from there, I went and worked for a consulting company, a defense contractor here in Australia, and did, I mean, a huge amount of work in sort of the pen test space, the digital forensics, secure code review type work, and worked with them for a couple of years, which was really good fun. I kind of got a huge spread of government, defense, commercial, a little bit of law enforcement work as well at the time, and that was, I mean, that was exciting. That was kind of for me. I was like, all right, this is the direction I want my life to go from this point forward. So I worked with them for a number of years and managed and ended up managing to run their Asia Pacific team. So I looked after the team in Australia, Malaysia, and Singapore, which was a lot of fun. And I think it was kind of at that point that my manager at the time, Peter Denahue, who now runs this, what originally was this small little company called Secure Code Warriors, and now has kind of exploded to doing lots of training for people in the development space. But I think he kind of interviewed me and kind of realized, like, this guy knows how to look after people and manage
Right.
people and can like run things to a schedule, which is what I'd done for
Mhm.
years prior. And he's like, oh, he seems pretty interested. Let's give this guy a role. And even today, he still says, oh, look, employing you was a little bit of a wild card. Like, you're a nice guy, but I wasn't sure where I was going to go.
Right.
But like, I was happy to find out.
Yeah.
So I worked with him for a number of years. Then I decided I wanted to actually go and play inside an organization doing incident response and forensics because I'd spent a number of years helping organizations. I was like, all right, I want to see what happens if I actually go internal and actually get a much longer view of an incident and try to actually help people a long time prior to an incident actually occurring. So I went and worked for Commonwealth Bank and looked after their CSIRT, their incident response team, which was a lot of fun. And that was kind of good. That was my first space of running that inside an organization.
Mhm.
And also, it was the financial sector. So I was kind of just limited to seeing the financial sector at that space. And then I kind of pivoted from there over to working for Salesforce. And originally with Salesforce, that was kind of a move just to help build out their Australian team over here. So they kind of have this follow the sun model with incident responders. So I went over and built out that team locally here in Sydney, Australia, and then ended up in this kind of hybrid role where I was still one of the leaders inside the global CISO at that point because they had offices in Australia, over in Dublin, and over actually on the east coast of the US, over in Virginia there. And they kind of said to me, "Look, can I run a team that does a bit more research in the incident response space?" And by this stage, I was kind of teaching for SANS at this point in time anyway. And I was like, yeah, well, like I kind of spend a lot of time talking to lots of digital forensics and IR people, and I'm kind of always keen to kind of push the boundaries a little bit with how we do incident response and forensics. So I ended up in this role with a kind of a small team scattered again globally to basically build new tooling or do research in the incident response and forensic space. And that was at the time that was predominantly around sort of large distributed infrastructure, given it was Salesforce, who have kind of
Yeah.
data centers scattered throughout the globe and in huge kind of network links and this massive scale. So I basically worked with them after I'd built the team out here in Australia. I then ran this research team to basically look at new tooling and new functionality to do forensics, which people just hadn't thought of before. And I mean, one of the ones that we looked at a number of years ago was even things like forensics inside of containers. I mean, containers kind of last for, or can last for a minute or two and then die. And it's like, well, how do we do forensics on that if there was some sort of vulnerability in the code that was in that container and someone was scanning it or managed to sort of do something nasty in there, how would we ever know if that container is now dead? So that was a lot of the main research that we kind of did over there, but we did a lot of other kind of incident response at scale, basically,
Mhm.
which was a lot of fun, and I worked with some very kind of smart people as part of that. And then more recently this year, I kind of got the bug again to go back and actually help people. So I moved back into consulting for a company called Ankura, who are kind of pretty well known in the US and the UK, and are essentially kind of establishing their team over here. And they'd approached me and spoken to me for a little while. I was like, "Who is this Ankura company? I've not really heard of them over here," which was normal because they didn't exist.
Right.
And I was, I think at the time, the Shannon, who I work with now, had kind of spoken to me, and I was like, oh, I don't really know who this guy is. I'll kind of give it a month, and we'll see if he
Right.
keeps bugging me and go from
Right.
there.
Right.
And he kind of came back and actually spoke to me, and I got a chance to talk to him on the phone. I'm like, okay, this kind of sounds interesting and a little bit different. And they kind of said, look, we want you to basically build a team and build a practice out in Australia. And they sort of said, we want you to build it the way you want to do consulting.
Oh,
And I was like, okay, that could
yeah.
be interesting because I mean, I spent time as a consultant, which was fine. I knew how that kind of all worked. And then I'd spent a number of years inside organizations where I'd employed consultants to come and assist. And I know I have a little bit of a reputation for being a little bit rough on vendors. So I was like, all right, you guys want me to consult? I can be a little bit blunt when it comes to
Right.
kind of like telling people the truth around things.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Like we want you to basically build this out a little bit. I was like, all right,
Yeah.
cool. Let's
Right.
let's give this a run. And that's pretty much where I've landed now. So I'm now the managing director here in Sydney, Australia for Ankura, and basically run the DFIR practice,
So a couple
which
of
is
things,
nice.
yeah, a couple of things,
Yeah,
and that I want to kind of go back to because it kind of a little light bulb. I said, oh, that would be cool. I just want to
yeah,
know
yeah,
is the first thing is kind of like a obviously you go to a SANS class, you're like going hope it's worth it, and then all of a sudden, boom, the light switch says you guys actually do this and get paid
yeah,
for this, right? So moving into that, I mean, the excitement that you had at that point, now with now you're instructing as part of the SAN. So, I mean, how do you incorporate that excitement that you have into that, obviously, to the story or to the information that you give to those SAN students that might be just as green as you were, putting their own buck, on the line,
yeah.
going, yeah, this guy better be worth it.
Yeah, it's I actually try to. It's a little bit hard now because we don't have live classes. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we're still doing teaching online, and that's still running really successfully. But it's one of the things I used to kind of mingle with the students and try to find out those who are kind of attending the course based on like their employer paying for it, and then those who have kind of forked out their own money for it. Because those are the people who, like, that was me, like, kind of
Yeah.
rolling the clock back 10 years. That was me, like, in that room, paying my own cash and kind of keen to find out where this journey was going to go.
Right. Right.
But I mean, I'm always very conscious of that as well. Like, there is that person who has paid a lot of their own cash, and you want to make sure that they have that same excitement that I felt a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I always try to bring that sort of energy back into training
Right.
in the room. But a lot of it too is like I honestly just enjoy doing a lot of forensics work. Like it's kind of like for me, it's no longer kind of a job. Like a lot of my time is either working, which is like kind of what most people's job like time is, like 5 days a week. But then kind of when I go home and like after I've kind of put my son to sleep, I'll sit up and kind of read what's currently going on and trying to understand the space more. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's not so much as it's just a 9 to 5 job and like it kind of stops there. But
Yeah.
it actually excites me doing investigations and doing work and even teaching the classes that I teach for SAN. So I teach the advanced incident response and forensics for Windows, and then also the advanced networking class as well.
Mm-hmm.
But like even talking about those and uncovering little things, I kind of bring back to people. I'm like, oh, this is actually very similar to something that we just looked at like the last week. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, let me tell you about that for just 2 minutes
Right.
because it's
Right.
really interesting.
Right. So
So
so so that brings up another and I think that one of the things, and because we've all been into different types of training, that you're like going, is it 5 o'clock yet? You
yeah,
know what I'm
yeah,
saying? Is that so as part of that, you bringing that in, you being that person, does it come down to those that, I mean, because you talked about and you didn't say who it was, and it's fine to give people props for the first SANS instructor that you had, but was that you kind of just fed off of that, or you fed off of your own kind of desire and excitement that you continue to go on? Because personally, I don't think that if you're not interested, if it doesn't
Yeah.
light your what is it, one, float your boat, right? If it's not
Yeah,
something
that's it.
that you're going to be able to be really excited about, it's hard to fake that, right? So
Yeah.
so so again, I think obviously you and being continue to being excited about it, continue to want to learn is a testament obviously to what you've done, but also something that people can learn from, right? Because hey, if you don't want to do it, you don't want, and it doesn't have to do with forensics. It's really any job that you want to do. If you don't want to do it, it's a
Yeah.
grind, right? It's just like, why
Yeah,
am I
that's
doing
right.
this every day? And there's something that you want to do, which, right? You started out doing something that you're like, okay, I mean, I think I want to do this, and you're like, yeah. But then you get into, what you're currently doing. You're like, I can do this every day. And it's one of those
Yeah.
things that you're like going, you don't even have to pay me. Now, granted, you do because we have to live, but it's
Yep.
one of those things is that you're like going, I just really enjoy it. And it's hard to
Yeah.
say. And honestly, the people that I have talked to doing all of these kind of these forensic, the happy hours, and these people that are in the community that continue to give and continue to give, they want to do it not because they want to be, hey, this is what I'm doing. They want to do it because they want to help somebody and because they enjoy doing the research. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with that. And also I don't even know what it is that all of a sudden like this spark kind of goes off inside of you and you're like, all right, this is for me. Like I've worked with people and employed people who have not even started sort of in the digital forensics space. Like I worked with actually two guys who came from very, very different walks of life. One guy was originally a mechanic. He was a trained mechanic and ended up running the threat intel team at one of the companies I was at, and was brilliant at it,
Mm-hmm.
like just amazing at it. And I don't know, and I mean, he kind of had a very similar story. Like he basically all of a sudden did a bit of like computer security work and was like, "This is for me. Like sign me up. Let's roll with
Right.
this." And even another very close friend and colleague of mine originally started out in sort of the restaurant business and was a chef for a while, and then pivoted over to doing like malware analysis. I'm like,
What?
like I don't know
Wait, what?
how you
What's
connect
this?
those two. Yeah,
Should I eat at your restaurant? I'm not sure.
yeah, yeah. That's that's right. Let's sit down and have this amazing meal, and then just talk about malware, which
Right.
is usually what happens when I go to his place.
Right. 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 Right.
But I think it's those people that I mean, I've always kind of gravitated to those people who are super keen on it. And like, and I get it. It's not. It doesn't need to be your life as well. Like people have their own life. I have this like wonderful 6 year old son, and he is an important part too. But when you are working, you want to work with people who are passionate about the work they do, even if it is just 9 to 5 and you're sitting there with them and working cases. But you want people who are excited by the work that they're doing and not doing that just to like take a paycheck and roll with it. And usually those people don't last very long. I
Right.
found as well
Right.
in
Right.
our industry, they kind of do incident response or forensics work and then kind of gravitate to something else. Just because, I mean,
Yeah.
our type of work is also on call
Yeah.
to a degree as
Exactly.
well when things
Exactly. Yeah.
go
There's
really
not
wrong.
necessarily, hey, you're done at 5, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so going back again to the second question that kind of sparked me is when you talk about containers, I love that, right? And
yeah.
so it's containers are great, but temporary containers are even better. So
Mm,
kind of walk everyone really through. I mean, is it something that obviously and explain containers, right? So
yeah,
if I'm going to try to explain it, and especially if you say I'll use because say Firebase, right, a Google platform.
yeah,
Containers are utilizing there are temporary, right? Whether data is going to be stored in there, and then it just flushes that type of data, right? Think of it like a cache.
yeah,
So so explain to people because I mean I'm really intrigued about the forensic side of a temporary nugget, right? And
yeah,
so I
yeah.
mean how do you go how do you go back, right? Is it jump in the time machine, jump back and look at the container? Explain to people because I think that honestly as much as we have as transactional data right now that once it's either delivered it's gone, right? And a lot of and I,
Yep,
I do mobile devices and that's what I do and that's transactional, especially you're talking about it's delivered, but obviously the data had to have been there. So
yeah, yeah.
talk about that. I mean that
How
is
that works,
super
yeah.
intriguing.
Yeah, it's I mean the way I like to explain it to a lot of people is um a simple version of a container is basically like a virtual machine that doesn't live very long. But it's a prepackaged. Think of it like a prepackaged virtual machine that you can spin up. It will process something, and it can connect to the internet. It can process files. It can hold files for a little period. It can compute things, and then basically when you stop it, it's gone. There's no we'll just restart it again and everything's there. It's basically temporal to the point that you shut it down, and that container is dead at that point. And that was basically the challenge that we were facing. We were like, how do we how do we deal with this? From the network side, it's not too bad. Like you can use kind of the common network telemetry tools that you would use as long as you get them in the right place. So that wasn't too much of a challenge. The harder part is the host based side of it and things like memory, because memory is amazing to go and look at that, but how do you actually go about trying to look at the memory for a container when it probably won't live long enough for you to even capture the memory?
Right.
So we did a couple of things. We looked at a number of commercial tools. We looked at a number of open source tools that were available as well, and we kind of took the view of what do we want to do if we could capture it? Let's assume for a minute that we could kind of just pause time and actually rip everything out that we wanted. What would that be? And we looked at that from the point of view of, well, kind of what's running in memory. There's some very interesting things there in terms of processes that are running and files and network connections, and then also files on the system, because containers for generally are basically like a Linux virtual machine is like a simpler way to explain that. So a lot of Linux forensics is all kind of file-based forensics that you're usually looking at. So we basically looked at using this concept of scraping things off the system, off that container while it was actually running, and then holding that for a period of time. And this was a little bit of a pivot away from how things like EDR technology currently works, where you stick an agent on an endpoint, and that agent kind of holds information and records information, but it holds it all on the endpoint. It doesn't actually usually ship that information back until you actually request it. And that's why we looked at other tools that were available, but we're like, this is not going to work for us, because if you leave the information on the endpoint, which is the container, once that container's dead, everything's gone at that point. So we need to ship this data off the container and actually stream it off the container and hold it. And that's what we did. We looked at a tool called Upticks, which is basically like a commercialized version of OS Query.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically streaming the data and streaming the actions off the container to a location that we could actually hold that data and then query it at a later point in time. And that kind of worked well for us, because we could tune things like the OS Query tables and the things that it was capturing to be just the things that we're interested from a forensics point of view. So if we really wanted to look at every file that was written and deleted from the system, we could do that with OS Query. It would allow us to basically stream that data off and do it.
Mm-hmm.
The other side to it is, and then I kind of looked after the host based side of it, but the other side of it was memory and being able to capture things that might be in memory. And that was a little bit of a harder challenge. In that case, we ended up building a tool, or actually I didn't build it, a colleague of mine, Naresh, kind of spent a lot of time building this tool and tuning it, which would actually go and capture the whole memory of the host that the container was running on. But then it would also run some select commands inside of the container itself. So this is kind of assuming that we could get to the host in the container really quickly and then execute something and then pull it off really fast. And because some of the environments we were playing in were very large distributed environments, it allowed us to do that kind of at scale and sort of en masse if we wanted to, and really rapidly if we wanted to as well. So that gave us telemetry inside, and then also this ability to capture items like in memory as well as we kind of went along.
So with so many systems that are now cloud-based, right? That they're either some AWS instance that that people are running all of these as a cloud desktop, right?
Yeah.
A lot of companies are deploying those to their users. So, I mean, one, explain to me. I mean, how important do you think memory and the capture of memory, if you're doing, say, if it's an endpoint investigation or what have you, or are you now saying, you know what, I think the important part, we need to make sure that we're going on to the AWA instance and just kind of spinning it up and doing some sort of forensic on that instance? Well, I guess twofold.
Yeah. I think I mean there's kind of two parts to that. One is the AWS side, and whether it be AWS Azure or
Yeah.
GCP or whatever it is you kind of want to look at. And then the other part of it is kind of the history around memory forensics and where that will go in the future. I do honestly think that memory forensics will end up very similar to how we treat disk forensics now, and that's just because of the space that people have in memory. Like if
Right.
we wound the clock back like 5 7 years,
Right.
people like the maximum memory people have would be like 4 gig,
Right, done. Yeah.
and yeah, that's right. And I mean nowadays the problem is you pick up a laptop and it's kind of a minimum of 16 gig
Right.
and upwards of that, and capturing that takes time,
Yeah.
and it changes over time as you do that as well. And I think nowadays a lot of our space as defenders and as investigators kind of has to move pretty quickly because our adversaries are doing that too. Like they're not just going to like wait for us to finish pulling the memory down before they
Right.
execute something in there and and change
Right.
what they're doing.
Right. Right.
So I honestly think that like over the next couple of years, memory will kind of become similar to how we treat disk forensics, where we actually go, let's just pull parts of memory that are interesting and not try to capture the whole thing because it just takes too long to
Yeah,
do
which
that.
which brings up to especially those people, and I know that they're still teaching this in some, even some institutions of kind of dead box stuff, right?
Yeah,
Which is kind of an issue, right? When we start talking about those things that are either keys that might be sitting, because memory isn't easy, right? Trying to go in and trying
yeah,
to capture that information because it's really typically no rhyme or reason that, from my understanding, right? But so how important is it to explain to people how important the that data could be? It could be, the only thing that you might need, or say that smoking
yeah,
gun that's part of that, to get some of
yeah,
these training. These other places like, oh yeah, you need to update from,
yeah,
five
yeah,
two
yeah.
years ago exactly how you do that, because quite honestly, that I've seen the majority of, if you're looking at vendors, if you're looking at open source tools, it's either we're talking about live systems and being able to go
Yeah.
in and capture the information, either triage that information. I mean, you do agree with that? Do you see that, your full box that you're going to go and drag down? This guy's running a 4 terabyte drive, right, and has
Yeah, yeah.
some big NAS, and you're going to be just like, yeah, fantastic. Let's just go image all these and get it
But
and move on to the
that's,
day. So, I mean, are those days gone? That now we're going and
I,
targeting and triage?
yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, they still have their place when you come to the space of things like courtrooms and places like that. But I honestly think that we'll move away from that space a fair bit. I mean, from what you said is exactly right. Like you end up with these like huge terabyte disk sizes that you're like, all right, let's capture that and we'll see you at the end of the week. It's like, no, 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 no. It
Right,
doesn't work that way.
right, right.
And memory's the same. Like I've worked on cases where we had memory which was like a terabyte in size of memory, and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
jeez. And I
right,
mean, even and it's still accurate. Like even today, we kind of go, well, let's capture memory, and we have tooling for doing that. But you kind of have people go, oh, we're going to capture a terabyte of memory. I guess so.
right,
Let's give this a crack.
right.
But and that's why I sort of say I think we'll move away from that space to go, all right, let's pull the things out of memory that are interesting, so we can start to triage that. And then, sure, we'll leave the full memory image running while we're actually got the triage evidence already, and we can start to look at that.
So
So
give
I think it'll go that way.
Yeah. So give some people an idea of, what is something. I mean, what are some nice nuggets that, if you are doing that and you are capturing some of the memory. Obviously, it can change depending upon what you're looking for. But I mean, what are some things some expectations that people might have when they are utilizing that as, evidence as part of their case or
Yeah.
their investigation?
I think the one which I use as kind of a nice, clear example for most people is that understand that nothing can kind of hide in memory. If it is malware that is armored and protected itself when it's on disk, which is what malware tries to do, so it can't be detected by AV and other tooling, is that when it executes in memory, it has to actually unfold itself in memory and kind of reveal itself. The other example for people who don't work in the sort of infosec space is that remember that anything encrypted on disk has to be unencrypted in memory if you actually want to write and read from it, or read the clear text version of it at
Mm-hmm.
least. And you need to remember that having those sitting in memory is like this gold that is just sitting there that you're missing if you don't grab that memory. I worked cases where we had people with TrueCrypt containers when TrueCrypt was a big thing at the time. I think it's now VeraCrypt.
Yeah.
But we used to do things like actually pull out some of the clear text contents that people had in their TrueCrypt containers because they were still sitting as remnants inside of memory, or even just things like file listings, which are encrypted on disk, but you can see those all sitting clear as day in memory. And if you're kind of missing that space, like there's some brilliant evidence that kind of sits in encrypted containers, but also understanding that execution can't hide as well in memory from a malware perspective. And this kind of, I mean, goes back on a question you actually touched on, but I didn't get a chance to answer, is around sort of that training side of it as well. One of the things I also, as part of sort of the pivot back into to sort of changing my career at the time and going into information security, I also thought, oh, well, maybe I should go back and actually do a proper degree in this space to kind of at least make it look like I'm interested to future employers.
Official.
Yeah, that's right. And in doing that, I mean, that was good. I mean, I was going back as a mature age student, and I was doing that at a night time outside my normal work as well. But there was this. This was after I'd done the SANS class, by the way, that I'd kind of paid for in my own pocket. And then there was a module at the university which was digital forensics. I was like, beautiful. This is me. This has got my name all over it. And I remember sitting in that class, and a good majority of it was, this is the cookies for the browser, and this is the forensic evidence that they provide. I'm like, all right, like, where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
Like, this is only, like, this
Those
is
are
tiny.
tasty. Those are super, super tasty, but
Yeah, that's right. And it was even after that class, I was kind of like, this is, I mean, how can it be this big gap between like this SANS class I just did and then also like a university? I'm like, this just doesn't seem right. And I think there is still this challenge with education institutions that do like or try to teach digital forensics, that they are just a number of years behind, similar to what you're saying a moment ago. That they just, I mean, forensics and incident response changes. Like it changes every time Windows gets updated, or Macs get updated, or Linux get updated, or phones, like you get new OSs for those like once a year almost. And if you don't teach the current version of those, then you're kind of doing a disservice to the people that you're actually teaching, because you're teaching them content from like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that also, I mean, a little bit later on then pushed me to go back and teach as well, because I wanted people to understand how to do the same type of work that I was doing, but also know how to do that correctly, and the current techniques and the current artifacts that we're seeing. And even now, although I mean my bucket of time is generally pretty full nowadays, but even now I still try to work with some education institutions and kind of go, these are the things that you should be teaching in this space in sort of forensics and incident response, because if you don't, you're kind of missing this huge section that people need to know about.
Yeah, and so it was kind of a rhetorical question, because I know that to be true, right, through the universities. And I've asked, I'm like, okay, I mean, what is it? What are the issues that you have of why with the curriculum? And it pretty much comes down to funding, right? It comes down to, well, you know what? We just don't have the time. We are putting all of our funding towards a football team, right? Or, something else on the educational side of it. But do you think that's just an excuse? Because honestly, I mean, there's a lot of people in the community. I know there are a lot of people in the community that would actually, like you have already, have the conversation and saying, hey, how can we update this? Because there's resources that are free. Now it just takes a person that you said that's kind of the grinder that's going to go, you know what, I love doing this. I love teaching students. I love giving them what they need to have. They need to do the research, because unfortunately there's a lot, and this is my own personal opinion, there's a lot of educators that simply just say, well, here, I'm given what I'm supposed to teach, and here's the book, and let's just start at page 1, because it's, well, is it a service? They're not paid enough. They don't. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I agree with you that those people that are coming out of the university, just like when you sat down, you're like, hey, I went to the SANS class. You're fantastic. And you're like going, you're looking at your watch, going, okay, well, here's the thing. Maybe I should teach this, right? So I mean, what recommendation might you have that at either the community or how can we go in and make sure that those people that are going into these programs are getting the things that they need. That obviously they're not going to step off after their 4 years, or however long that they're going to go to school. That they can step off into a career, but at least put
Yeah,
them at the same level of the operating
that's right.
system that's out there, right? They're like
Yeah, yeah,
going,
that's right.
so they're like, what? Android 5? It's not the ones you guys are
Yeah, yeah,
using.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
so what are some recommendations that you might have?
Look, I think universities, in our space at least, for forensic and incident response, need to work more with the actual industry is doing that at the moment. That was one of the big things I kind of saw change over time. Like there was a university here in Sydney that I worked with for a little while, and I used to sort of say, look, let me come and do some guest lecturing for you to at least kind of like walk people through, even if it's just for one class, what they're going to expect and see once they leave from here. And then that kind of pivoted as well. I then assisted at another university where a colleague of mine kind of built this challenge, which was a forensics challenge where we'd sort of built this small environment and basically ransomware the system and then gave them the disk forensics for that
Mm.
and walked them through doing that for like 3 hours in a class. And that was really good. But what I kind of saw over time was the universities changed some of their requirements for these guest lecturers. They're like, you can't guest lecture unless you have a PhD. And I'm like, what? I was like, that's as I okay, I get that for some like academic components, like probably very important, but what about the practical side? Like the people are going to need to be able to do this hands-on when they actually leave, or at least be set up to do this. And if you're limiting that to PhD instructors, then you're just going to cut this massive amount of
Mm-hmm.
resources that you have from the field. And thankfully, they've since realized that they've kind of reversed that. But there was kind of like a good 4 years where that was the case. I'm like, what? Like, why are we kind of doing that to these people that are going through these classes? Because like I want people to come out of those courses, whether it be SANS or any other sort of educational institution, to have the same excitement that I had. Like to realize that this can be a full time career, and this is what it would look like if you were to do that.
Right.
And I think while universities are kind of still teaching content from years ago that's not accurate, we're going to like continue to do a disservice to those people. And I think that's why I'm not sure the US is a little bit different, but in Australia we still see this skill shortage, particularly in the
Yeah.
DFIR space. And I think that's just because we don't really educate people what that is. And we need to get sort of universities and even more back at high school curriculum to actually leverage the resources in the community. Because I mean, our community is pretty happy to get up and talk in front of a crowd
Yeah.
of people. Sure, it's not as polished sometimes. I mean, some of the conferences I've been to kind of range from nice professional through to a beer in the hand
Right.
at 7 in the morning, which it is for me over here.
It's
But
perfect.
yeah, I know. But the content though doesn't change. Like you're still at least getting people information that's timely and accurate, so they can take that and use that, and see what their life might look like if they went down that road as part of doing digital forensics and response.
Yeah. So how important do you think it is for practical? I mean, practical instruction. All right. This is the real world type of instruction,
Yeah.
rather than, hey, this in theory is how it works, right? So when you do and you instruct people or you let people know, I mean, do you think that the hands-on or the practical, something that people can wrap their head around, this is why I'm doing that, is the best type of instruction?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think I think you have to do the hands-on part. I think both need to kind of go hand in hand together. Like you have to really walk people through the theory side of things. And that's more so that they understand how different types of evidence work under different circumstances and how different things react under different circumstances. But then you actually need to show them and let them play with that hands on as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of like even today when I'm running a case, I'll still pull apart individual pieces of evidence rather than going to a master timeline because a master timeline is good, but pulling apart those little pieces of evidence kind of is this targeted focus, and you can kind of concentrate on those pieces of evidence as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can really focus on what is actually going on with what's occurred on the system.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't sort of have the theory to back up, why would I pull apart this little piece of evidence first rather than just jump to a timeline?
Mm-hmm.
You, people sort of don't understand that at that point. But it's not until you get hands on that people are like, well, there's a lot of timestamps here and a lot of a lot of like these files everywhere. Why are these appearing like this? And I think you have to get let them get hands on and get comfortable with it, so that when you do send them out to the real world and to work a real case, they're not overwhelmed by the amount of data that they're going to see, and they kind of have an understanding of how that works.
Yeah.
The other side to it too is on the incident response side, you want people to understand if they're on a live system, what happens when they do certain things as well. Like if they execute a command and it crashes the system, like you want them to
Oh,
do that training institution first rather than live. I mean, you would never forget it when
right.
you do it live,
Right.
but having them do that in a controlled environment is much more productive than letting them do that
Right.
once you've released them.
Right. So let's get on to again containers because I
Yeah,
wanted to and I wanted to talk more about this because and you kind of wrapped it up for me because you started talking about timestamps, started talking about containers. So I want to talk about really your work, your recent kind of work, because I'm not only I don't want to say I am intrigued, but this is has been I don't want to say a bane, but it has been obviously I'll let you explain it and then I will explain it. But so talk about all the compressed, people are like, oh yeah, so I have, this compressed folder and everything else like that. So let's talk about exactly what happens because you've done some research, obviously, with the different utilities. And I think that I mean, not only extremely important, but wildly important that people
yeah.
understand the implications that you obviously running into these different types and the different forms of compression.
Yeah, this kind of came about from a number of different cases I kind of worked over the years, where it be either that you basically find a bunch of compressed evidence, which is usually the threat actor has kind of like zipped up or RAR'd up a bunch of what they've just stolen from you and are about to exfil it. So it's come all the way from that all the way through to law enforcement kind of handing back a zip file of contents that belong to another organization, going figure out where this came from. So um, so I kind of thought, yeah, yeah, no, that's right. And they're like, how did you get this? But it kind of came from that type of work, and I thought, well, like I'd done this type of work over a number of years. I was like, all right, it's time to actually show people this because I was talking to colleagues, and they're like, what do you mean that timestamp's not correct in a zip file? I'm like, you don't know that? I'm like, oh man, I got to write this up. So I thought, you know what, I better do a bunch of research on this. And I started to look at the different types of tools like common tools that the threat actor would use locally on a system. And then also some of the things I'd seen threat actors use, which people don't really think about. So people know like a zip file, a RAR file, a 7-zip file. But there's also these cab files as well, which are
Mm-hmm.
essentially compressed files, which like a couple of threat actors were using for a while because that all natively sits on the system. Investigators don't always go looking at
Right.
cab files. I think they're just part of install files and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I thought, all right, I need to actually do a bit of research and go, if you build compressed files in different ways, how does that actually look forensically? Having knowledge of what I'd put inside of there, I then basically went back and said, all right, what can I pull or what artifacts can I get from these different compressed files, assuming they've been built with different types of tools, and then actually map those out
Mm-hmm.
and share that with everyone. So that's kind of where that research started. I need to actually take it a little bit further because that was all done on a Windows system using kind of four common sort of compression tools to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to go back and do that as well from a Linux side and from a Mac side as well, because I know from the work I've done that timestamps alter differently depending on which operating system you're on and which tool you're on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And and being able to do that research and provide it back to the community kind of, I mean, I enjoy doing that because it gives people back the same things that I've kind of learned anyway throughout the years.
Yeah, and so I think well, it's important, and what I was going to add to that, obviously, you have with your research is, one of the things that I've done. I don't want to say, I'm old, but was back in the day, a lot of the tools, if you would say export a file system or whatever, you'd export a file system to a compressed folder. A lot of the tools are actually exporting that into a temp and writing it to disk and then actually compressing it, on the side of that.
Yeah,
And, and people are bringing it into their other, forensic utility and like going, dude, it's like yesterday. Why?
Yeah, yeah.
What just
The
happened to all
timestamps
these
are
dates
from,
and
yeah,
times? You know,
yeah,
it's all kind of jacked up. Is and
yeah,
honestly, that happened for years.
yeah,
Is just simply laying that down. Hey, I'm going to compress it. Okay, fantastic. Well, you probably better think about exactly how you're doing it to make sure that you're preserving those timestamps. So, you know, I mean, the recommendations of those people, because there's still people that are going to take evidence and they're going to go and compress that, you know, going to compress that information out there. So, I mean, what recommendations can you give to say to those examiners, law enforcement that said, "Hey, fantastic! Here's all the evidence contained in this zip file,"
yeah,
and
yeah,
you look at it and go, "Wait, what?" Because honestly, people still do it to this day.
yeah,
They do not
yeah, yeah.
understand. And
That's
like I
right.
said, the work that you have done for people to go in and look and to read that, you know, they're like light bulbs, like, wait, what? What?
Yeah.
So,
Hang on, it changes this timestamp.
right,
Hang on, that
right.
time, and that kind of that also came about from recently. I actually looked at some work that an analyst had done. I was like, you realize that that access timestamp for this zip file is not like that's not real. That's not actually a timestamp that exists inside the zip file. They're like, yeah, yeah, the like the commercial forensics tool I use like gave me this timestamp. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
let's have a chat.
right,
Let's
right.
sit down and just walk through this. And like you're right, it is knowing what's going to alter timestamps is hugely important. And this kind of goes back to that theory side of things. Like you need to show people under what circumstances you're going to alter evidence. And I do fully appreciate that there are times where you will knowingly have to do that. Like if you capturing memory, for example, alters evidence. I mean, you're
Yeah, sure,
altering
sure.
memory as you capture memory.
Right.
But you need to understand as an investigator what actions you're doing will have what results on the evidence that you're looking at. So you're not misinterpreting that evidence.
Oh,
And
100%. Yeah.
yeah, and if people don't understand that and look at that, then oh man, like you kind of you can really kind of make a mess a little bit
Yeah.
of reporting or analysis work that you're actually doing
Well,
as
yeah,
part
you're
of
going to
a
add more questions to it, right? And, I mean, really, you what? So that again, you know, leads or begs a question of, is that the training side of it or the education side of it is extremely important because you
yeah
know a lot of people have become so tool centric that they believe exactly what it says, right? This is exactly what it says, rather than saying, okay, this is what it says, and it doesn't seem right, but you know what, the tool must know, and not diving
yeah yeah
in,
yeah
you know, right, not diving into it and saying, okay, that doesn't seem right, or you know what, I need to verify that, I need to find out
yeah.
exactly how that is, because quite honestly, I don't think that enough people are doing that. I mean, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, yeah. I no, I completely agree with that, and that was why the recent blog post that I kind of wrote on the compressed files, I tried to write it in a way to kind of go, this is what I did to actually perform, like to get this information out, so that people understood how they could go and do this themselves and conduct their own research as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I fully support that people should try to imitate some of the tools that their threat actors are doing to understand what evidence alters and changes over time, because if you don't like if you don't put in that research and if you don't I mean that's exactly what you kind of need to do, go hang on, this timestamp doesn't seem right or this evidence doesn't kind of seem right, something here kind of seems unusual, like repeating that in a lab or sort of in a controlled environment is exactly kind of where you need to go,
Yeah.
so you know what artifacts are produced as part of it. I mean that was a lot of the research work that I'd spent time doing when we were looking at containers and things at scale as well. As we kind of went, all right, let's just try this and see like what works and what doesn't work and what evidence is lost and if we do this type of task.
Yeah.
And knowing that is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's, you know, I just, boom, it popped in my head, you know, so you know that when you know, the hair stands on the back of your neck or something that, you know, you just don't feel comfortable with, say, a situation.
Yeah,
Now we can call it like the DFIR spidey sense. You're like, hey,
that's it.
this
Yeah.
doesn't look, I just don't feel comfortable, because it's, if you're saying that to yourself, you got to look into it, right? Because you
Oh
have to,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
you have to get, if you're not feeling it, you're like, okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. No, because if you ever have to now go in to either testify or actually have to give this information,
yeah,
or you're talking to attorneys, or this is, or to your client or your customer, and you have to explain it, you're like, I know, oh, yeah. And now you're going to spend a lot of time trying to do it
yeah,
that
yeah.
way, right?
That's right.
Right.
And also like I encourage people to lean on the rest of the community as well. Like our community is extremely strong and usually a very open community as well. Like if even when people come up to me from from other consulting firms or from internal teams. Like I don't look at that as competition. I kind of look at that as this challenge when they kind of go, well, we got this far, but we couldn't get any further. I'm like, oh man, did you try this? Or I
Yeah.
was like, what about volume shadow copies? Did you have a look at that? Did you
Right.
pull this apart? And they're like, oh, we didn't look at that. I'm like, go have a look,
Yeah.
go have a look.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
think
like
that's huge.
like
That's huge.
yeah,
And to be honest with you, I think the community, and I talk about this pretty much every episode, but the community during this time, this crazy 6 months it's kind of been type of time,
yeah,
has kind of really opened it up. I think that one, people are more open. People are more, I guess they contribute more. They
yeah,
I don't want to say they have more time because they don't have more time, but it comes down to one, either not being able to go say, Sands with the summit, all these
yeah,
different types of these get-togethers that you can have, that people are putting these things, together. Everything's kind of virtual, but I think people want to contribute now. I mean, there's so many tools that have
yeah,
come out, so many people that are writing, so many people that are putting things together. Again, I use the term always silver lining. I think that there is kind of a
yeah.
forensic silver lining out of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think it has pushed our community to collaborate a lot better as well, and talk and share with each other a lot better. And that result of that has kind of pushed away like these borders that used to exist. Like I know in Australia there is a very very strong like DFIR community, which a very tight knit community, and everyone kind of knows everyone. And with things like the pandemic at the moment, it's kind of pushed people to communicate with
Yeah,
those outside of their own little bubble.
yeah,
So they're talking with people in Europe and London, and then people in other Asian parts of the world, and also in the US. And it's just pushed people to communicate more and share more, which I think is hugely
yeah,
beneficial to
yeah.
our
I
industry.
think I think people are just deciding, like, you know what, we're human. These are
Yeah,
the things we're like going, man. Yeah, it could be a lot worse, right? It could be at least that people are communicating and they're trying to get things going on and they're trying to kind of shed things, and that's the whole reason. Be human, about
yeah,
it, and share the knowledge, because to be honest with you, if if you think you're the smartest person in the room, just go ask someone, because they are, right? There's always going to be, and there's every
yeah,
day you
yeah,
can learn something new, right? And if you're not, then you're in the wrong room, because there's
yeah.
always, always, always something that people continue to, obviously, learn from, grow. There's so many things out there. So what kind of recommendations, and I know we're going a little long, but what kind of recommendations? I mean, where can people go to that? I mean, that you might go to some, we like free. So where can people go
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
get some information to, hone their craft, learn something new, grab some new DFIR type of stuff.
Oh, okay. At the moment, I kind of chop and change with this. I mean, I enjoy reading sort of select people's blogs and Twitter posts, so I'm a big fan of both of those mediums. But that kind of changes over time as new people come about. One of the good kind of community places at the moment is there is like a big Discord
Yeah,
DFIR
yeah,
server at the
yep.
moment, and that is like I've kind of seen that explode in the last
Shout out to
12 to 18
Devin and
months.
Andrew. Yeah, the
Yeah.
DFIR Discord been fantastic.
And, and I think that at the moment is a brilliant place for people who are just starting out, who are intermediate, or who have been in the industry for a long period of time, to help and provide advice back to
Mhm.
others. But that, I mean, I actually look at it and I get a little bit overwhelmed every now and then. I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of channels and a lot of side conversations going on in here.
Right.
But I think it is great because it has kind of brought the community together and allows people to chat and communicate together in one place.
Mhm.
And I think that'll kind of overtake a lot of the mailing lists and things like that, which have been around for a long time. And also, it's searchable, which makes it much easier.
Mhm.
So definitely get on that. That'd be one place I'd go and have a look. Other than that, I tend to find a lot of new technology, new things that are coming out, are often done like through people on Twitter and through those blog posts,
Mhm.
and spend some time kind of like reading those or finding the ones that are interesting for those as well. I mean, even personally, I still am always learning. Like I never kind of go, oh, like I know everything. I enjoy finding out something new. It's kind of like this little challenge that I have every week. I'm like, all right, what can I read that's new that I haven't learnt before? Or that I've forgotten usually is always the case. I'm like, oh man, I looked at this like 5 years ago. That's
Right.
right. This is cool.
Exactly.
Um, So I usually look at a lot of those blogs and those and various kind of Twitter feeds for those. And keep in mind that there are a lot of open source tools. There is also um, there's like an open source software for DFIR Slack instance as well,
Mm,
which is where a lot of the developers behind things like Plazo, Log to Timeline, or Gur, or any all those open source tools
mm.
kind of collaborate and work together.
Oh, that's a good one.
So that's also a really a good one to go and look at. But I
Hmm.
think a lot of those kind of chat and collaboration places where a lot of people are starting to go nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I agree. I agree. Everyone, the communication has really kind of exploded on those. I mean, those types of mediums. I think
Yeah,
because obviously people don't have the conversation, an open conversation, because everyone has had the same problem, right? They're going
yeah,
through,
yeah,
and being able to go through it. Someone has gone through it, and if they haven't, you're able to post it, and someone's like, "Oh yeah, I didn't put anything in there. This is what I did." And
yeah.
again, it's a great resource, man. I appreciate you taking your Saturday,
Yeah,
obviously,
that's all right.
and going through all of this stuff with me. And I'm gonna have to make it to Sydney when they actually open the borders up.
Yeah,
Everything is kind of obviously still closed down, and it's been
yeah, yeah.
probably about 8 years, I think, since I have been there
Oh
before.
wow,
So,
oh,
but
nice
I'll have to make the trip.
for
So
sure.
yeah, I do appreciate it. So see, my beer is gone now, and
Oh, you're done.
yeah, I know I'm done. So awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been great.
Oh, of course. Oh, another great forensic happy hour. I mean, honestly, we just planned for like 15-minute conversation, well, maybe 20, and it just continues to go. I mean, I'm talking, there is some unbelievable information. So hopefully you guys made it to the end. If not, you can fast forward to the end, but no, because there's too many good little tidbits. The entire conversation, really good stuff. We talked about training. We talked about different containers. We talked about those compressed files. I think that probably in your examinations, any type, if we're talking about mobile devices, if we're talking about, disk forensic, we're talking about anything that is laid out either by a tool, you guys, I mean, you got to make sure that you're looking into some of these things. Get down in the dirty. Don't trust a tool. So I appreciate it. Again, next week we will have another fantastic guest. Remember, you have to wait until probably Tuesday to find out. So cool. Thank you guys for attending. Everyone have a good weekend.